Hello and welcome back to Knack Kitchen, where this week we are going to be making a garlic and rosemary focaccia, and this is the first savory recipe on this channel, and I am so excited to share this with you because I know that this recipe is absolutely delicious. So without further ado, let's just see how we make it. So the first thing that we are going to do is we'll add some yeast into a bowl, and to that we'll also add some sugar which will act as food for our yeast, and then we'll add some lukewarm water which should be around 40 degrees Celsius, and then we'll stir this until the yeast is dissolved, and we'll let this sit until the yeast is bloomed. So after about 5 minutes, our yeast has bloomed and it's all foamy on the top, so we're adding our rosemary and some oregano for flavor, and then we're going to go ahead and add some garlic oil, which is basically just extra virgin olive oil mixed with some garlic, and then we'll add some water as well, and then we'll give this a nice stir until everything is mixed together. So while we were stirring, I remembered that I forgot to add salt. So here I'm adding some salt, and then we can go ahead and add the flour as well. And I don't add all of the flour at one go. I first add about 3/4 to about 80% of the flour and mix that in, ensuring that all of the flour is hydrated. And once that has happened, I'm going to go ahead and add the remaining flour and bring that all together into a dough. So I like to switch over to my electric mixer, which just makes the whole kneading process a little easier, and I knead the dough for about 2 minutes until the dough is a little stretchy and it looks somewhat like this. It's still a very sticky dough, but that's exactly how it's supposed to be. So at that point, we're going to switch over to our countertop. Here I have my pastry mat and I've floured the surface and my hands so that the dough does not stick. And then we'll transfer the dough onto our floured surface, and then using a lot of extra flour because the dough is sticky, I am going to now knead this by hand for about 2 to 3 minutes. Now in case you don't have an electric mixer, you can just do the whole process by hand, and it should take roughly about 8 to 10 minutes. Brought the dough together, we are going to transfer this onto a greased bowl which I have greased with the garlic oil which we made earlier. I'm just moving the dough around so that it's coated with the oil on all sides and does not stick to the bowl. So now we're just going to cover the bowl with some plastic wrap, and we'll let this dough sit while it doubles in size. So that can take anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half. So after about 90 minutes, our dough has risen and it has doubled in size. Well, it's actually more than doubled in size, but that's no reason to complain. So we're just going to punch it down and release the air. And then we're just going to loosen the dough from the bowl. And now we will transfer this onto a well-greased baking tray. Now when I say well greased, I mean that we're going to use some of the remaining garlic oil and actually smother this tray with that oil, because it is after all going to be the base of our bread, which also needs to be flavorful. So now I'm just going to gently spread this dough out onto the baking tray until it reaches the edges. Now sometimes your dough may resist you, and when I say resist, what I mean is that as you're trying to stretch the dough out, it shrinks back to its original state, and what that means is you need to let it sit and rest. So we're going to cover the dough with some well-greased plastic wrap because we don't want it to stick to the dough, and then we let this sit for about 15-20 minutes and resume then. So now that the dough is well rested, it is easier to stretch the sides, and as you can see, it is now covering the entire baking tray just as we want it to. Now, I like to bake this bread the next day as it allows the yeast to act on the dough and develop a much better flavor. But in case you're in a hurry, you can bake the bread on the very same day. Just let this sit for about half an hour and then you can bake it. However, I would strongly recommend that you refrigerate the dough for at least 12 hours. Overnight would be best, or even up to 24 hours. The longer that you keep the dough in the fridge, the better flavor it will develop. So here I have the bread on the very next day, and here I also have the remaining garlic oil which we make. And now I'm going to just dip my hand in this oil and have it all greased nicely because I want to create some dimples on the bread. And when I say dimples, all you're going to do is poke some holes onto the bread, and that is because it is a trademark for a classic focaccia and we want to make it as authentic as we can. So after we've created the dimples, we're going to add as much of the garlic oil as we can. And I know it looks like a lot of oil, but it's all going to be absorbed by your bread, and this is where the flavor lies, so don't be stingy. And now I'm just going to top this with some more rosemary because it is a garlic and rosemary focaccia at the end of the day. So a little more rosemary would not harm. And I'm just going to poke that in as well. And now our bread is finally ready to go into a preheated oven, and we're going to bake it for about 20 to 25 minutes. And here you have our gorgeous focaccia, which is perfectly browned and ready to be sliced. You don't need to let this sit or anything. You can slice into it right when it's hot and it's going to be perfect. So I'm just going to slice into this to show you just how beautiful it is. And here you have it. It's on a plate and I've sliced it up into little squares. It's almost like a savory brownie in my opinion. It gives me the same amount of joy as any slice of brownie does. And I really hope that you try this recipe because it is so delicious and so amazing. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.